In this video, I will be talking about assessing Kirkpatrick's Level 2, which is learning. In the Kirkpatrick model, learning is defined as the knowledge and skills that participants increase as a direct result of your workshop and training. And so learning is measured right after something is taught. So within the workshop or at the very end of the workshop is where Level 2 happens. This is one thing that distinguishes it from Level 3, which happens sometime after the training. So Level 3 is more, did it stick, and do people actually use what they learned in the workshop? The assessment indicator for Level 2 usually ties back to your student learning outcomes. Your lesson plan may have 3, 4, or 5 student learning outcomes, but what you want to do is in Level 2 assessment, isolate and assess those that are measurable and capturable. Here are some examples of outcomes that can be measured at Level 2. Students will be able to generate at least 5 keywords that are relevant to their research questions. So I could see an activity, and we do an activity in which we have a mind map and we have students write their research question and then come with at least 5 keywords that they could use when searching in a database. Then I collect those worksheets, those mind mapping, could be online, could be print, and then back in my office I can score them. Students will be able to deal with complex research by breaking complex questions into simple ones. Again, this can be an activity during the workshop where I give a complex research question and then students have to record somehow simpler research questions. Given a sample website, students will be able to articulate why the source is authoritative. Once again, an exercise that can be done during the workshop. I give them a website and they have to complete the exercise. And this is actually very similar to what you're going to hear about in the next video that talks about how we use Level 2 in one of our workshops. Now, not every outcome can be assessed at Level 2, and that's okay. Here are some that I wrote based off of the ACRL framework. Students will be able to develop and maintain an open mind when encountering varied and sometimes conflicting perspectives. This is such an affective rather than cognitive behavior that I think it'd be very difficult for us to come up with some activity or exercise that students could do within the workshop to get at this high level skill. Students will be able to use various research methods based on needs, circumstance, and type of inquiry. Here's a learning outcome that is just way too ambitious. There's no way you could do an activity that would capture all elements of that learning outcome. Students will be able to see themselves as contributors to scholarship rather than only consumers of it. I think for that you'd have to do some kind of focus group or interviews, and that would need to happen after Level 2 and probably would be more of a Level 3 kind of assessment. So some common methods that are used when assessing Level 2 are quizzes and worksheets and pre and post tests. So when I talk about a quiz, I'm talking about something that is meant to measure a small part of your lesson plan. So let's say you spend 10 minutes on creating keywords based off a research question. At the end of that 10 minutes, right away, you ask 1 or 2 questions about that concept before you move on to the next step, which might be using your keywords in your database. You do that part, and then right away, you ask questions about using databases with the keywords. So if you want to do this in print form, you can do that. That would be collectible. Or you can do it online with Poll Everywhere, Kahoots, Top Hat, or Clickers. Something, though, that you make sure that you can capture that will download the data, but that would make it formative. So if you see at the end of the search strategy one that, oh, they're not getting this, you could dig a little deeper rather than going forward into the next part of your lesson plan. But that would be Level 2, right? You're seeing if they learned what you just went over. Worksheets are something that we use at Radford extensively. We have students doing activities and exercises throughout our lesson, and then we pick them up and bring them back to the office and score them. Pre and post tests are very tempting because the idea is you get a baseline and then you teach your lesson plan, and then at the end you see if they do better on the post test than the pre-test. The research and my personal experience has not quite fit the goal, Part of it is in a one-shot. We have very limited time. That's something you all have been talking about on the discussion board. And to fit a pre-test, the lesson plan, and a post-test within that 15 minutes or hour can be very, very challenging. And if you're doing a post-test at the end of a session, we know that the students are already thinking like about their next class or where they have to go to next. And so that's a real issue with the pre and post-test. Also, there's ideas of that a lot of the concepts that we want to evaluate are too complex for a pre and post test, and they're things that need to be thought about, and so they may be better off with a level 3 kind of assessment. But if you have experience with pre and post tests, please share them in the discussion board that's coming up very soon. So a couple things with level 2, you need to make sure you create an artifact. So there has to be something that you can collect, either download or pick up and take back to the office that you can score. And that can be a Google Doc or a worksheet, but it can't be something like turn to your neighbor and discuss the different kinds of keywords that you might use for this research question, because there's no way you can measure that. You might get students who volunteer answers, but for assessment we want to get as much data from the class as possible, and so a printed, written, or downloadable document is the best bet. Also, depending on your student body, you may want to advertise that you're going to collect it. Sometimes that helps students remain engaged more, especially if you say, I'm going to give it back to your professor when I'm done. And that can be actually a really important part, because if you're teaching at the point of need, you might be doing things that they really need to do on their own and they want the worksheet. No problem, I say. Either I will take the worksheets back to my office, make photocopies, and return them to the professor right then and there. Or if the professor needs to run off, or if I'm teaching outside the library, I will send the worksheets back to the professor through campus mail so that he or she can distribute them back to the students.